I'm absolutely delighted to be here today and to have this opportunity to talk to you about something that I think we all know is so important. When I think about Froebel's work, I'm always drawn to his sense of unity, that idea that everything is connected: nature, spirit, community, and the unfolding life of each child. The title of this keynote, Seeing, Unfolding and Flourishing, traces a journey, one that begins with how we see children, and it moves through how we support their unfolding, and then finds its purpose in how they flourish within our communities. For Froebel, education began not with instruction, but with relationship, with the quiet act of noticing and the deep trust that when we create the right conditions, life will reveal itself through play, through belonging, and through connection. Flourishing is a more contemporary word, but I think it sits beautifully alongside Froebel's vision of unity. It speaks to living meaningfully within relationship and within community, to what happens when unfolding continues beyond the self and each child finds joy and purpose amongst others. When we look around our settings today, we see increasing diversity and complexity. We have fewer resources, yet higher expectations and higher levels of need. Inclusion is not an aspiration, it's the everyday reality of our practice. And you might ask why I'm so passionate about this. I am that parent, the one whose child could have a full-blown tantrum for over an hour, who didn't know until he was 10 that he was autistic, or that his brother, diagnosed much later at 24, had ADHD. The one whose children struggled with routines, with noise, with change, who sometimes couldn't follow the rules everyone else seemed to manage. I was the parent who faced the eye rolls, the quiet judgment, the well-meant advice. I didn't need a parenting course. I needed understanding, I needed community and connection. And those experiences taught me that inclusion isn't a policy, it's a way of seeing. Behind every challenging moment is a story, and what families need most is empathy, not evaluation. Our role is to see each child for who they are, not as a list of needs or challenges, but as a necessary, essential member of humanity. This is demanding work, physically and emotionally, and you are all doing it in systems that are not built for the complexity of childhood today, and yet you all continue to show up, creating moments of safety, of connection, and of possibility where children can grow. Scotland's early years ethos is rooted in inclusion and diversity as the norm, the belief that every child matters and that every story belongs, and our legal frameworks reflect that. So the Standards in Schools Act affirmed every child's right to learn in their local school. The Additional Support for Learning Act replaced the term special educational needs with additional support needs, and that really recognised that children need support for many reasons. They may be disability, bereavement, being looked after, English as an additional language, or just simply their life circumstances. And then the Children and Young People Act placed well-being and relationships at the heart of practice. And of course, as Mark alluded to, most recently, the UNCRC Incorporation Act brings children's rights fully into Scots law. And Curriculum for Excellence carries that same spirit, reminding us that learning follows stages, not ages, and that every child is entitled to be challenged and supported and valued. In Scotland, we are fortunate enough to have one of the most inclusive policy landscapes in the world. But legislation on its own is never enough. Inclusion is not a policy. It's a daily practice of seeing each child. So what do we actually mean when we talk about inclusive education? I think it's easy to use a word and maybe not pause to unpack it. So let's just think about that. Exclusion happens when children are denied access to education. That's what it used to be. We used to send children off to residential institutions. Segregation places children with additional needs in separate settings. Aside from their peers, it might be a unit, but they're still separated. Integration brings them in, but only if they can fit those existing structures. But inclusion, though, it asks something more radical. It's not about fitting children in, it's about reshaping education itself. True inclusion means rethinking curriculum, pedagogy, and organisation so that every child can participate and learn in ways that reflect who they are. When we talk about inclusion, it can sound abstract. It can be about systems and policies and access, but actually at its heart, inclusion is relational. It's about how we see and welcome each child. And Froebel understood this long before we had the language for inclusion. As Helen Tovey writes here, he valued the uniqueness of each individual. But he saw that individuality and community are not opposites. Each enriches the other. A few years ago, I had the privilege of speaking with a family about their experience of finding a nursery place for their child. Their little boy had complex support needs, and they had visited 6 nurseries before finding the one that felt right. When they spoke to me, they became emotional because the final nursery was the first place where the staff truly saw their child, not just his disability. They knelt to his level, they made eye contact, they spoke to him, not over him, and they began not with challenges or support plans, but with welcome, with curiosity, and with delight. And his parents said, for the first time we felt wanted, not just a problem to be solved. And that, I think, is what inclusion really means. It's not just access or a policy, but belonging. And that contrast between the 6 nurseries and the one that truly saw the child captures something essential about how we see children. Those first 6 nurseries were seeing through what we might call a medical model. They didn't mean any harm at all. They were caring professionals, but their gaze began with diagnosis. They saw the child through a lens of difficulty, of what needed to be managed or fixed. The final nursery was different. They began with the child, not the diagnosis. They looked for possibility, not problem. And that's what we mean by a social model, the belief that the barriers don't live within the child, but within the environment around them. And that difference, that shift in gaze, changed everything for that family. And we might say that one approach begins with lack and the other with love. And that movement from fixing to understanding, from assessing to belonging, is the heart of inclusion. And this movement is also where Froebel gives us such rich insight. He offers us a language that goes beyond diagnosis or deficit, beyond seeing what's missing to recognizing the wholeness already there. Froebel saw education as not just as a process of changing or molding or filling up an empty vessel, but as a process of becoming, where every child at every stage holds value and purpose in their own right. And our task then is not to shape the child into something else, but to create the conditions for their unfolding. So as we move forward, I want to explore 3 ways of thinking about inclusion that flow from this Froebelian view: seeing, unfolding, and flourishing. So Froebel believed that to educate is first to observe, to truly see the child as they are, not as we imagine they should be. Observation, of course, is a form of assessment, but in a Froebelian sense, it's not about measuring or ranking, it's about understanding. Through observation, we notice what children can do, how they think, and what draws their attention. We begin where the learner is, focusing on capability rather than deficit, seeing each child as competent and full of possibility. When we shift our focus from what's missing to what's already there, something changes. Curiosity replaces judgment, and observation becomes an act of attunement and care. I remember a little girl who was not interested in mark making, and she'd pass the writing table every day, however beautiful and inviting staff made it look. But at the start of each term in our setting, we asked children to create a simple black line portrait of themselves, not to check milestones or spot what they couldn't do, but to capture their progress over time. And staff were really worried because she wouldn't take part in this. She didn't want to do that drawing, but they wanted something that could show her learning. And I remember being out in the garden, and I saw her with a stick, and she was tracing the edge of a puddle, slowly and deliberately following the curve of the water's edge, adjusting each line as the ground changed beneath it. And in that moment, I realized she was mark making, just not in the way that we expected. And it reminded me that when we look for one kind of evidence, we can miss the learning that's right there in front of us. Sometimes we need to shift our gaze from what fits our plan to what fits the child's. Kaliala reminds us that our pedagogical responsibility begins with truly seeing the child, and she cautions that while the phrase externally passive, internally active speaks of balance, if we lean too far into passivity, we can really risk poor practice, adults standing back, chatting, supervising, rather than observing and responding. And she urges us to attend not only to seeing, but to the responsive action that follows. And Froebel called this, of course, we know, freedom with guidance. Children need the freedom to explore and to express, but they also need our thoughtful and sensitive support. Of course, guidance doesn't mean directing play, but it means joining the child's flow with intention, extending a thread, offering language, posing a question, or adding a material that helps an idea unfold. Sometimes it means supporting emotional regulation, noticing when excitement tips into frustration, or when a child needs to help find calm before they can re-engage. Our best work often happens in those brief moments when we notice, pause, and choose our response with care. I'm reminded of observing children playing with blocks and building a tower with blocks and noticing how they were testing and adjusting each piece. And it wasn't very safe, but I moved beside them and said, it's wobbling a little bit, what could make it stronger? And that small question sparked new investigation and collaboration. My presence shifted from observer to co-thinker, not taking over, but extending the learner just enough to deepen it and make it safer. And that's freedom with guidance in action, not control, but participation with purpose. We're saying to the child, I see you, I'm with you, let's explore this together. And this brings us to Froebel's own understanding of what it means to see the child. To see in a Froebelian sense is not just to look, it's to attend, it's to wonder, and to sense the child's inner life shining through action. And we've all been trained to observe children's behaviour, but Ellen Waydell helps us see that in the education of man, Froebel meant something richer. First of all, he talks about practical seeing, noticing what children do, where they play, who they're with, and this is the foundation of our assessments and our planning. Secondly, he talks about symbolic seeing, holding back from easy inferences, being curious and empathetic, wondering about the meaning of a child's actions rather than judging them. And third, there's spiritual seeing, recognizing that every child carries an inner life, a spirit, a potential for unity. And Froebel writes about the importance of beholding the inner in the outer. And when we bring all three of these things together, it becomes a pedagogical act. And of course, this kind of seeing isn't always easy. It's hardest in the moments when children's behaviour really challenges us, when the noise rises, when we're tired, when we feel stretched thin. But those are often the moments that matter the most, When we can pause even briefly and hold curiosity rather than judgment, then something shifts and we can start to see the child beneath the behaviour. Beholding the inner in the outer requires care, because Froebel also warned us not to take the outer at face value. He wrote, "Nevertheless, education should not draw its inferences concerning the inner from the outer directly. When we focus only on what's visible, the behaviour, the resistance, the defiance, and forget the inner world of the child, we risk misunderstanding them entirely. Behaviour is never the whole story, it's the surface of something deeper, a story waiting to be understood." Froebel saw the world as one great unity, and he saw that expressed through endless diversity. Every child, with their own experiences, languages, and ways of being, adds to the harmony of the whole. And when we see difference as belonging within unity, not outside it, we step away from the deficit lens that ableism creates. Talia A. Lewis defines ableism as a system that assigns value based on constructed ideas of what is normal, how a child should behave, communicate, or learn. Froebel's principle of unity and diversity resists that completely. Each child's way of being is part of humanity's wholeness. Researcher Kerry Murphy, drawing on neurodiversity affirming practice, invites us to shift from decoding and correcting towards attunement, a stance of deep noticing and responsive action. And attunement is not passive, it means co-regulating with children, adapting our interactions and adjusting expectations so that diverse sensory, social and communication needs are supported. And while we can't redesign our settings, we can create micro-ecosystems of belonging where difference is anticipated, not accommodated after the fact. When we meet children with attunement rather than intervention or reaction, we create the conditions where unfolding can begin. So, if seeing is about attention, unfolding is about response. It's about allowing what is within the child to emerge rather than shaping them from the outside. Froebel believed that unfolding is the life work of all things. Everything in nature, a seed, a flower, a human being, carries within it the potential for its own becoming. Our task as educators is not to mould that growth into something else, but to nurture the conditions in which it can flourish. And Froebel wrote that we should value a person not for what they take in from the outside, but for what they unfold from within. It's a radical idea, especially in systems that measure and compare and intervene. To work with the principle of unfolding means trusting the child's inner direction while also recognizing that our role as the adults is essential. Like gardeners, we do not simply stand back and wait. We observe and tend and respond. In this way, freedom with guidance becomes the living practice of unfolding. Froebel saw learning as the natural unfolding of inner life, and that unfolding does not follow straight lines. And we often speak of stages of development, but children's growth is far more fluid. It moves in circles and spirals rather than in steps. In play, children return to familiar ideas, materials, and feelings in order to make sense of them in new ways. And what might look like repetition is really deepening, revisiting to explore meaning. Each time they come back, they bring more of themselves, more understanding, more imagination, more confidence. And when we think in spirals rather than stages, then we can see that repetition becomes growth, a way that children consolidate and transform what matters to them. Learning is not linear, it's living. It unfolds through rhythm and return, through cycles of curiosity, of experimentation and discovery. And Froebel captured this beautifully when he wrote, "The plays of childhood are the germinal leaves of all later life." Every circle of play carries the seed of something lasting, a way of thinking, feeling, or relating that will continue to grow throughout life. Tina Bruce captures the spirit of play as unfolding when she writes that it's about wallowing in ideas, feelings and relationships, a process that brings unity and interconnectedness. And what she describes builds directly on Froebel's idea of harmony between the inner and the outer life, and on Brunner's notion of the spiral curriculum that children revisit ideas and experiences again and again each time with deeper understanding. Through her 12 features of play, Bruce helps us to see how this deepening works: freedom, control, imagination, mastery, and reflection. In play, children return to what matters, testing, rehearsing, and transforming ideas until they make sense. This process is a kind of restorying, making the familiar new, finding meaning through return. Early stage theories of play, such as Mildred Parton's, suggested that play develops in sort of fixed stages, from solitary play to cooperative play. But we now know that this is not how play works, and Bruce shows us something very different, that play is fluid and social and symbolic. Brehony and Hakkarainen describe this as mature play, when a child's inner and outer worlds are fully engaged and they are absorbed in the act of meaning-making. And our role as adults is to recognise and protect that depth, creating the conditions where play can grow richer and not just move forward. And it asks more of us than standing back. It calls for that attentive participation, being near enough to sense what is unfolding and ready to respond when the moment invites it. And in this way, play becomes a meeting place of the inner and the outer life, where feeling, imagination, and experience find their form. A resource that helps us translate this into practice is the Layers of Play framework, developed by the Froebel Partnership at Guildford Nursery School with guidance from Tina Bruce. And it recognises that play grows in depth rather than height. Children don't move neatly from one kind of play to another. They move fluidly between layers of exploration, imitation, and imagination. A child might, within a single day, explore materials sensorially, imitate the actions of others, create a simple pretend play scenario, and then return to sensory play. Each layer feeds the next. And what matters is not which layer a child is in, but how we can observe, support, and extend their play so that it can deepen. The framework helps us by offering concrete examples, what we might see a child doing, the resources that can enrich their play, and how we might respond to or extend it. It connects directly with realising the ambition, interactions that are attuned and responsive, experiences that are first-hand and meaningful, and spaces that nurture imagination and well-being. The Layers of Play framework offers a way to honour Froebel's principle of unfolding, helping us see play as a dynamic process of growth that can be tended, not directed. And Froebel's vision of unfolding assumes steady rhythm and security. But what happens when those rhythms are interrupted? When the outer world no longer fully supports the inner life? Recent years have shown us exactly that. Froebel's vision of unfolding assumes that steady rhythm and security, but when those rhythms are interrupted, when the outer world doesn't support that inner life, what happens? During the pandemic, many expectant mothers experienced profound stress, isolation, disrupted care, financial strain, uncertainty. And research shows us that such prenatal stress can subtly alter infant development, influencing reactivity, temperament, and early brain connectivity. In Froebelian terms, that natural harmony between the inner and the outer was shaken, the unfolding of self disrupted. When we see children who are struggling in our settings, often what we're seeing is dysregulation, children whose early experiences were marked by stress and who are still learning how to feel safe in relationship and in the world. And play in this context becomes the practice of repair, rebuilding trust through connection, movement, imagination, and joy. Our task is not to fix or accelerate, but to create the calm relational rhythms where self-regulation can take root. Toxic stress in early life, from physical or emotional abuse, chronic neglect, domestic violence, poverty, isolation, disrupted attachment, reshapes the brain's stress systems. Many children enter our settings with bodies tuned for vigilance, not ease. Froebel understood education as tending life's unfolding, not through intervention, but through attunement and relationship. And when we offer warmth and rhythm and authentic play, we help the child's inner regulation re-emerge. And this is co-regulation in practice, the adult's calm nervous system lending steadiness until the child's can hold it alone. Through attuned relationship, stress gives way to security, restoring harmony between the inner and the outer world. And in our work, there are moments that test us. When a child shouts or runs or lashes out, it can feel personal, stressful, even defeating. I think about a day, I remember this day so clearly, when a little boy was brought to my office, something that rarely happened in our setting. He had punched a baby in a pram, he'd hit several other children, and he wouldn't listen to anyone. The practitioner who brought him was exhausted, hoping, I think, that I might be able to reach him in some way. What she didn't yet know was that I had had a phone call that morning. His father had just returned home after being on remand for domestic violence. For this child, violence was not new. It was something that he had learned to live alongside. And when I spoke to him quietly about hitting being wrong, he looked almost surprised. And when I asked what might make things better, hoping perhaps for a sorry, he asked for a hug. Moments like these remind us how much lies beneath behaviour, how much of a child's world we can't always see. Perhaps our default position should be that something is going on, and to meet behaviour with curiosity, not condemnation. Recently, something that I've been hearing people say is they don't know how to play. Oh, we're having to teach them how to play. And I've been hearing that not just from ELC practitioners, but from primary teachers. But we know that even the youngest infants play through sound, through touch, through gaze and movement. And as Eve Whistler reminds us, there's not a right or a wrong way to play. Many children today have had fewer opportunities for shared play and for more stress and isolation. Their play may appear repetitive, fragmented, or rough. Some are neurodivergent or live with physical or cognitive differences. And for those children, unfolding follows different rhythms and different paths. And our task is not to measure those against expected milestones, but to honour each child's unfolding as equally valid. When we see play that doesn't make sense to us, it's not deficit, but an invitation to slow down, observe, and learn from the child. Froebel's idea of harmony between inner and outer life extends beyond the child to the networks of care and identity and belonging that hold them. Each family's way of knowing, caring, and creating meaning shape how a child unfolds. And to honour unfolding, we must honour all families, LGBTQ+, blended, single parent, co-parent, adoptive, looked after, kinship. Children flourish when they see their families reflected with respect and with joy. And as Louis and Bettridge remind us, fostering an anti-bias approach means critically examining how our thought structures shape our practice to ensure that we are not unconsciously limiting a child's chances on the basis of their race, culture, ethnicity, religion, or background. This is unfolding in its fullest sense, growth through connection, through justice and belonging. Each family brings its own ways of knowing, caring, and creating meaning, and their languages, their routines, stories, and traditions are not separate from education. They are education. And Funds of Knowledge reminds us that families hold expertise, knowledge shaped by lived experience. When we connect with that expertise, learning becomes a shared process, unfolding across home, setting, and community. A living curriculum grows from real lives. It asks us to see beyond a single cultural lens and to value the experiences, histories, and connections that families bring, both local and global. When we learn with families, not about them, we ensure every child sees their world reflected and valued. Welcoming family knowledge isn't an addition to the curriculum, it becomes the curriculum, a curriculum of belonging. Froebel understood that growth cannot be hurried, and he wrote about tending rather than moulding, trusting the natural rhythm of unfolding. And Green and Clark described this as slow pedagogy, a way of being that values time as relationship, not as measurement. Unfolding takes time, not clock time, but lived time. Children's growth follows its own tempo, bursts of energy, long moments of absorption, and pauses that look like stillness but are full of quiet work. And the adult's role in this is deeply participatory. We practice being with, offering unhurried presence. We allow ourselves to go off track, following the child's curiosity rather than the timetable. We dive deep, staying with an idea, a question, or a moment of wonder until it reveals more. And we take the longer view, seeing each encounter as part of a much larger story of becoming. To practice slowly is not to move in slow motion, but to move at the pace of attention, attuned to each child's rhythms, their play, and the world they're making sense of. And in a time when policy and pace urge us to rush, choosing to go slowly is a quiet act of resistance. It protects depth, presence, and meaning, creating space for the child and for ourselves to flourish. We often talk about enabling children to reach their potential, but do we ever stop to think about what we really mean by that? The words reaching potential implies a destination, a final version of the person waiting to be achieved. For Froebel, the purpose of education was life unification, a harmony between the inner and the outer, the spiritual and the material. Life for him was a continuous process of being and becoming, not something to reach, but something that unfolds. He wrote that humanity in man should not be looked upon as fixed and stationary, but as steadily and progressively growing in a state of ever-living development. And that sense of ever-living development sits at the heart of flourishing. Flourishing is life in motion, not success or arrival, but the pulse of growth, rest, and renewal that never truly ends. Pascal and Bertram remind us that flourishing is a process, a rhythm of feeling good and functioning well within relationship. And Froebel would have recognized this as the work of self-activity, the inner life force through which each child expresses, creates, and connects with the world. He believed that growth comes from within, and that education's task is to provide those conditions for that inner energy to unfold. So flourishing then is self-activity in motion, the inner and outer worlds staying in conversation, each shaping and enriching each other. And flourishing is not merely feeling good, it's feeling good and functioning well, engaging with the world, forming caring relationships, finding meaning, and growing in the company of others. Joy, trust, autonomy, empathy, these are not add-ons to learning. They are the signs that the soil of relationship is healthy. Flourishing is not about perfection or compliance. It's about aliveness in children, in families, and in the adults who teach and care for them. It's about relationships deepened, the inner and outer worlds growing together. And Froebel reminds us that life is made of difference, not opposition. Diversity is not a problem to solve. It's how life reveals its wholeness. In education, inclusion is not about reducing difference, but recognizing it as the life force of community. Florian and Spratt describe difference as ordinary, the fabric of human development. And Helen Tovey urges us to find the common threads that can bind a community together, the unity in diversity. When every language, body, rhythm, and story has a space to be heard, diversity itself becomes the condition for flourishing. And in that moment, we move from I flourish to we flourish together. Froebel's words here are clear and uncompromising. We give plants and animals time to grow in their own rhythm, yet treat the child as something to be shaped. And flourishing refuses that. It asks us to trust the natural rhythm of unfolding, to tend rather than to mould. Our task is not to make the child what we wish them to be, but to create conditions where life can grow in its own form. Every gardener knows that growth depends on conditions, on light, on warmth, on soil, on water. And in education, our conditions are time, space, relationship, and rest. Growth cannot be forced, only tended. Every small, repeated act of care, a gentle greeting, a predictable routine, a moment of listening, builds the culture of belonging which children can risk, explore, and imagine. So I invite you to pause for a moment and think, what small change could you make on Monday that might help a child feel more seen, more free to unfold, more able to flourish? Because this is where philosophy becomes practice, in the tiny, ordinary daily acts that create extraordinary conditions for growth. And just as children need time and rhythm and relationship to unfold, so do we. Reflection is how we tend our own growth, how we pause and notice and reconnect with what gives our work meaning. Froebel saw educators as learners among learners and human beings growing in relationship with children, families, and the natural world. And reflection with guidance, developed by the Froebel Partnership, offers a way to hold that spirit in practice. It isn't a checklist or a form to fill, it's a rhythm, it's a way of pausing, noticing, and reconnecting with the principles that give our work meaning. Think of reflection not as evaluation, but as nourishment. Just as children need time and rhythm and relationship to unfold, so do we. The first two lenses of the Reflection with Guidance tool help us to see, not just to look. Lens 1, context, invites attention to pace, time, space, time, rhythm, and seasonality, the material and temporal conditions in which children live and learn. Lens 2, actors, turns our gaze towards people and relationships. Who is present? How is time shared? How children, adults, and materials are acting upon one another. And together these lenses cultivate respectful observations, seeing practically, symbolically, and spiritually. They connect directly with the seeing part of today's keynote. Observation as attunement, a willingness to be changed by what we notice. Lens 3, the network of development and learning, moves from seeing to participating. It focuses on the interplay of first-hand experience of culture, play, and freedom with guidance, connecting with unfolding. And Lens 4, transformation, asks us to notice change over time, well-being, confidence, creativity, and belonging, the visible signs of flourishing in children and adults alike. And in this way, these 4 lenses echo the rhythm that we've explored today: seeing, unfolding, flourishing. And they point us to what comes next: belonging. Everything that we have seen, tended, and nurtured today finds its purpose here in being and belonging. Belonging is both the ground and the horizon of Froebelian practice. It's where unity becomes lived experience, where diversity finds coherence, and where education becomes the art of community. So as we come to the end of this journey together, I'd like to return to that final idea, being and belonging, and what it means for each of us as educators and as human beings in the lives that we shape every day. Froebel believed that at its heart, education is about unity, about helping each person find their place in the harmony of life. He saw the human being not as a fragment, but as part of one great whole, nature, community, and spirit interwoven. Being and belonging is how we live in that unity. To be is to bring one's inner life into relation with the world. And to belong is to know that who we are is welcomed, valued, and needed. Tina Bruce reminds us what that looks like in practice. Helping children to know themselves and be comfortable about who they are opens up their possibilities to learn. For children, belonging begins when they are seen and heard, when their play, stories, and ways of being are received with respect. For educators, belonging is found in connection too with each other, with families, with the natural world, and with the deeper purpose of our work. Belonging is not sameness, it's relationship, the space where difference coexists with unity. When we create environments where children and adults alike feel part of something larger, where they can contribute and be changed in return, education becomes what Froebel intended, a living ecology of humanity and nature. Every act of seeing, every moment of attuned support, every small instance of care, these are not just professional gestures, they are acts of belonging. Through them, we make community visible. And perhaps that is what it means to be truly Froebelian today, to live as educators who help others to see, to unfold, and to flourish, until together we find our way to being and belonging. Thank you for the work that you do, and for helping children, their families, and one another to be and to belong.